We're counting down 12 famed soul artists whose lives ended in tragedy after leaving Motown, testing just how real the so-called Motown Curse is. From hitmakers whose careers faded to legends lost to scandal, early death, or stunning misfortune, each entry unpacks a different twist in this haunting pattern. Some cases complicate the myth, others make it hard to doubt. Which story stands as the most chilling cautionary tale? Let's begin the ranking with a surprising control case at number 12. At number 12 sits a name that does not fit the Motown pattern, Minnie Riperton. Born in Chicago in 1947, Riperton recorded for Cadet and later Epic, never signing with Motown. Her voice soared higher than almost any singer of her era, especially on the 1974 classic Lovin' You, where she floated into her signature whistle register, a sound that still stops listeners in their tracks. By the mid-70s, Riperton was a rising star, blending soul, pop, and jazz with a style all her own. But her story turned heartbreaking far too soon. Diagnosed with breast cancer at just 29, she faced her illness publicly, becoming one of the first celebrities to speak openly about her diagnosis. On July 12, 1979, she died at age 31, leaving behind a husband, 2 young children, and a voice that still echoes in playlists and memories. Minnie Riperton's tragedy stands apart, proof that the heartache of this era reached beyond Motown's walls. Levi Stubbs spent nearly a decade as the unmistakable lead voice of the Four Tops, guiding the group through Motown's golden age from 1964 to 1972. When the Four Tops left Motown for ABC Dunhill in 1972, it broke a streak of chart dominance, but it did not bring the kind of sudden tragedy that shadows so many Motown departures. Instead, Stubbs and his bandmates kept performing, their signature harmonies and full orchestral arrangements still echoing the Motown sound, even as the industry around them changed. For years, Stubbs remained an active force on stage, his baritone anchoring the group's live shows well into the 1990s. In 2000, he suffered a stroke that ended his performing career. After 8 years of declining health, Levi Stubbs died on October 17, 2008 at age 72. His long life and late passing remind us that leaving Motown did not always mean an early end. Sometimes the music outlasted the myth. Mary Wells was just 21 when she left Motown in 1964, walking away from the label that had made her a household name. At the time, she was riding high. My Guy had just reached number 1 on both the pop and R&B charts, and her run of hits stretched back to 1961. The promise of a better deal at 20th Century Fox, a $200,000 advance, and the lure of film roles convinced her to make the jump. But the move came at a cost. Her first singles with Fox, like Ain't It the Truth and Use Your Head, barely cracked the top 40, and none matched the crossover power of her Motown work. The magic faded quickly. By the late 1960s, her name had slipped from the pop charts, and she spent the next 2 decades chasing comebacks on smaller labels. Financial struggles followed, and the spotlight never returned in full. When Mary Wells died of cancer on July 26, 1992, at age 49, it was after a long decline that began the moment she stepped away from the Motown machine. Still, the opening notes of My Guy can turn any room soft, a reminder of the voice that once seemed unstoppable. Benny Benjamin's name rarely made it onto album covers, but his hands shaped the Motown sound from the very beginning. Born in Mobile, Alabama in 1925, Benjamin moved to Detroit and became the heartbeat of the Funk Brothers, Motown's house band. His drumming powered classics by the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, and the Temptations, laying down a groove so steady that producers called him Papa Zeta. His sense of timing, what musicians call the pocket, was legendary. Listen to the snap of the snare on My Girl or the shuffle behind Heat Wave, and it is Benjamin holding the whole thing together. Yet, for all the hits, recognition and royalties were scarce. Motown session musicians worked long hours for flat fees, rarely seeing a dime from record sales or radio play. When Benjamin died of a stroke on April 20th, 1969, at just 43, there was no pension, no safety net, just a few peers who understood what the world had lost. Bassist James Jamerson later said, "When he died, I couldn't eat for 2 weeks, it hurt me so bad." Benjamin's story isn't just about a single tragedy, it is a reminder that behind every star, there are players who gave everything and got almost nothing in return. James Jamerson's hands shaped the sound of Motown, even if most listeners never knew his name. As the house bassist for the Funk Brothers, Jamerson played on more #1 hits than the Beatles, Elvis, and the Rolling Stones combined. His bass lines, like the rolling groove on Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, carried the weight of entire songs, slipping through the mix with a quiet brilliance. But while the stars on stage drew the spotlight, session players like Jamerson worked long hours for flat fees, rarely seeing royalties or public credit. As Motown moved to Los Angeles in the early 1970s, Jamerson's steady work dried up. The loss of steady income, paired with years of heavy drinking, took a toll on his health. By 1983, he was living in near obscurity in Los Angeles, struggling with alcoholism and chronic illness. On August 2nd, 1983, Jamerson died at just 45 years old. Pneumonia and heart failure were listed on the obituary, but the real cause was buried in decades of exhaustion and neglect. His funeral drew a small circle of fellow musicians, many of whom owed their careers to his uncredited genius. Jamerson's story stands as proof that the Motown curse did not just haunt the stars up front, it claimed the quiet architects behind the music too. Tammi Terrell's name is often woven into the Motown Curse story, but the timeline tells a different truth. At just 24, Terrell died from a brain tumor on March 16, 1970, while she was still signed to Motown. Her voice, paired with Marvin Gaye on classics like Ain't No Mountain High Enough, defined the label's golden age of duets. Terrell's career was cut short not by a departure from Motown, but by illness. Her last recordings were completed as her health declined, with Motown still releasing her music. Press reports from 1970 and Marvin Gaye's reflections in Divided Soul confirm she remained a Motown artist until the end. The myth that she died after leaving the label does not hold up. Her story is one of talent lost too soon, not a post-Motown tragedy. The ache in those duets, the chemistry with Gaye, still echoes, reminding listeners of a life and career that ended while the contract and the music were still very much alive. Florence Ballard's story begins with a voice that helped create the Supremes, Motown's crown jewel. In 1967, that voice was silenced, not by choice, but by force. Berry Gordy removed Ballard from the group she had founded, replacing her with Cindy Birdsong, while Motown kept Diana Ross at the center. Ballard's exit was not just a career setback, it cut her off from the stage, the spotlight, and the financial security that Motown controlled. Attempts at a solo career faltered. By the early 1970s, Ballard was living on welfare in Detroit, raising 3 daughters in a small house and fighting a losing battle with depression and alcoholism. The world learned of her death on February 22, 1976. She was just 32. Doctors listed cardiac arrest, but friends and family knew it was the years of heartbreak that wore her down. Mary Wilson, her fellow Supreme, later wrote that maybe she never would have sung again, but at least she could have been happy. Only then did I realize that simply being happy in life was more than enough. Listen to the early Supremes harmonies, and Ballard's voice still rings out, full, rich, and unmistakably hers. For a moment, the sound is all hope, before the silence that followed. Paul Williams was the original backbone of the Temptations, a founding member whose baritone smoothed out the group's sharpest edges. By 1971, though, Williams was forced into retirement. Years of grueling tours and the pressure to stay relevant had battered his health and spirit. The group he helped build was now moving on without him. The applause faded, and so did the sense of purpose that drove him through Motown's golden years. Depression set in, deepened by financial struggles and the feeling that the world had left him behind. On August 17, 1973, Williams' story ended just blocks from Motown's old headquarters in Detroit. He was found dead in a parked car, a gunshot wound, ruling his death a suicide. He was only 34. The symbolism was hard to ignore, one of Motown's architects lost within sight of where it all began. The pain behind the harmonies had grown too heavy to bear. For a moment, his unmistakable baritone, steady, rich, and haunting, can still be heard in the group's early tracks, a reminder of the voice that once anchored the Temptations through every storm. David Ruffin's voice was once the sound of hope on the radio. His lead on the Temptations' My Girl defined a generation. By the early 1970s, though, Ruffin's run with the group had ended. He left Motown behind and set out alone, but the road ahead was rougher than anyone could have guessed. Years of touring, missed opportunities, and a deepening struggle with addiction chipped away at the fame he had built. In the summer of 1991, Ruffin's story reached its lowest point. On June 1st, he was dropped at a Philadelphia emergency room by a limousine driver. Unresponsive, he carried no identification. Hospital staff listed him as John Doe. The man who once filled stadiums was now anonymous, lost in the shuffle of a city hospital. The cause was a cocaine overdose. He was 50 years old. For days, no one connected the body to the voice that had carried My Girl to the top of the charts. Newspaper obituaries and coroner reports confirmed the details, the official end of a life that had once seemed untouchable. In the background, Ruffin's falsetto still floats, aching, sweet, unforgettable. The cost of his fall from Motown was paid in obscurity, a final act that turned a legend into a stranger. Eddie Kendricks left the Temptations in 1971, stepping away from one of the most influential groups in soul music. He was known for his soaring falsetto, the voice that carried hits like Just My Imagination and Get Ready. After years of creative disagreements and the relentless grind of touring, Kendricks set out solo. His first years apart from Motown brought a flash of hope. Keep on Truckin' climbed to #1 on the Billboard R&B chart in 1973, and his signature sound found new life in the early days of disco. But the promise of a second act faded as quickly as it arrived. Without Motown's machinery behind him, Kendricks struggled to keep his momentum. The hits slowed and the venues got smaller. By the late 1980s, he was touring with fellow Temptations alumni, playing old favorites to nostalgic crowds. Even as his health worsened, Kendricks kept performing. In 1991, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, but the need to keep working pushed him back on stage just months before his death. On October 5th, 1992, Eddie Kendricks died at age 52. His obituary ran in papers across the country, remembering a voice that once seemed untouchable. The long, slow decline from Motown's spotlight to his final days stands as one of the era's most drawn-out heartbreaks, a falsetto that faded but never truly disappeared. Michael Jackson's story stands apart from every other name on this list. In 1975, the Jackson 5 walked away from Motown, ending a 7-year run that started in 1968 with I Want You Back. Motown had launched Michael as the cherubic frontman, but by the mid-70s, the group felt boxed in, with no songwriting control and no ownership of the music that carried their name. The split was headline news, Billboard covered the move, and the Jacksons signed with Epic, leaving behind the label that built their brand. What followed was not a slow fade or a struggle for relevance. Michael Jackson became the most famous entertainer on the planet. Off the Wall in 1979, then Thriller in 1982, were records that shattered every sales barrier, songs that still fill dance floors. The 1974 groove of the Jackson 5, bright, layered, and unstoppable, gave way to a new sound, but the roots were always there: Motown polish, family harmonies, and pure showmanship. But for all the money, fame, and global reach, the story ended in a way that no amount of success could prevent. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died in Los Angeles at age 50. The LA County coroner ruled the cause as acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication, a lethal mix administered by his own doctor. The world stopped. News outlets replayed the facts: years of painkillers, mounting debts, a comeback tour that would never begin. Here was a man with every resource, every connection, yet still lost to the same shadows that haunted so many who left Motown's orbit. Michael's fall was not about faded fame or industry neglect. It was the collapse of a superstar, proof that tragedy could reach even those who seemed untouchable. For a moment, you can hear the old Jackson 5 records, Dancing Machine, and Never Can Say Goodbye, echoing the innocence that started it all. The Motown Curse, if it exists, does not follow a simple path. Michael Jackson's fate complicates the story, showing that even the biggest stars cannot outrun the dangers that come when the music stops. Marvin Gaye's split from Motown in 1982 was headline news. After 2 decades with the label, Gaye walked away, burned out from legal battles, creative frustration, and years of tension with Berry Gordy. The move brought a rare moment of hope. In June 1982, he signed a lucrative contract with CBS Records and released Sexual Healing that fall, a comeback that seemed to promise a new chapter. Behind the scenes, Gaye's life was unraveling. Financial troubles mounted, the IRS chased unpaid taxes, and drug use deepened. He moved from city to city, sometimes disappearing for weeks, sometimes living out of suitcases or with friends. By 1983, he had returned to Los Angeles and moved back in with his parents, a decision that reopened old wounds from a childhood marked by violence and control. On April 1st, 1984, one day before his 45th birthday, an argument erupted between Marvin and his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., at the family home on Gramercy Place. The fight turned physical, and court records and police transcripts describe a brief, brutal confrontation. At 12:38 p.m., his father shot him twice with a .38 caliber revolver. Gaye was pronounced dead on arrival at California Hospital Medical Center. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death: gunshot wounds to the chest and heart. Cocaine was present in his system, but the coroner's report listed the gunshots as the sole cause. His father later pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter and received a suspended sentence. This moment of violence ended a life already marked by struggle. The shock rippled through the music world. The funeral drew thousands, with Berry Gordy and Motown's biggest stars in attendance. Gaye's final years, just 22 months after his Motown exit, had spiraled from creative rebirth to violent tragedy. The songs endure: What's Going On, Let's Get It On, Sexual Healing. But the story behind them is forever shadowed by the abrupt public end of a life that had already survived so much. The Motown Curse, if it exists, found its sharpest point here: an artist who changed music, undone not by obscurity or neglect, but by violence at home, so soon after leaving the only label he had ever called home. Across all 12 stories, one pattern stands out. Fame and legacy offer no shield from struggle once the spotlight fades. For too many Motown legends, leaving the label meant facing industry neglect, isolation, and battles few ever see. This isn't just music history. It's a reminder of the human cost behind iconic soundtracks. The soul survives, but its stars are far more vulnerable than we remember. Share your thoughts below. Who moved you most?